Welcome to Read Poems Every Day. Today I thought I might do a key term video on apostrophe. Apostrophe, not the punctuation mark, is a figurative use of language where the speaker directly and explicitly addresses either an absent person, absent because they're just not around, or because they are dead, or because they haven't been born yet, or to an abstract or non-human entity. If you've ever read a poem that addresses a muse, addresses an object, addresses a work of art, addresses a photograph, using the pronoun you or thy or thou, these would be instances of apostrophe. As would this poem I read recently by Frank O'Hara, To the Harbormaster. This is the opening poem of a collection of his meditations in an emergency from 1957. And I just want to share it with you and maybe two other poems. I won't waste a ton of time, say, theorizing how to understand apostrophe, but I think it's important to learn to identify it, but maybe then also to theorize what apostrophe affords a text or affords a writer. What does apostrophe make possible? Maybe one thing I'll say before I read is apostrophe seems one of the most basic and fundamental tools of lyric poetry. And what does the tool do? It sort of animates a situation that is in real life impossible. So it is the animating, creative, sort of visionary, almost magic power of a lyric speaker, um, who is in some sense sort of conjuring a scene and a situation that as readers we occupy sort of as eavesdroppers, but also both as the person doing the conjuring, if we read it aloud, and as the figure, as an entity sort of standing in for that figure who is absent. So anyway, here is To the Harbormaster. I wanted to be sure to reach you. Though my ship was on the way, it got caught in some moorings. I am always tying up and then deciding to depart. In storms and at sunset, with the metallic coils of the tide around my fathomless arms, I am unable to understand the forms of my vanity, or I am hard alee with my Polish rudder in my hand and the sun sinking. To you I offer my hull and the tattered cordage of my will. The terrible channels where the wind drives me against the brown lips of the reeds are not all behind me. Yet I trust the sanity of my vessel, and if it sinks, it may well be an answer to the reasoning of the eternal voices, the waves which have kept me from reaching you. Kept me from reaching you, a direct and explicit address either to an absent person or to an abstract or non-human entity. Let's take a look at Grace by Joy Harjo. This is a prose poem for Darlene Wind and James Welch. I think of Wind and her wild ways, the year we had nothing to lose and lost it anyway in the cursed country of the fox. We still talk about that winter, how the cold froze imaginary buffalo on the stuffed horizon of snowbanks, the haunting voices of the starved and mutilated broke fences, crashed our thermostat dreams, and we couldn't stand it one more time. So once again we lost a winter in stubborn memory, walked through cheap apartment walls, skated through fields of ghosts into a town that never wanted us, in the epic search for grace. Like coyote, like rabbit, we could not contain our terror and clowned our way through a season of false midnights. We had to swallow that town with laughter, so it would go down easy as honey. And one morning, as the sun struggled to break ice, and our dreams had found us with coffee and pancakes in a truck stop along Highway 80, we found Grace. I could say Grace was a woman with time on her hands, or a white buffalo escaped from memory. But in that dingy light it was a promise of balance. We once again understood the talk of animals, and spring was lean and hungry with the hope of children and corn. I would like to say, with grace, we picked ourselves up and walked into the spring thaw. We didn't. The next season was worse. You went home to Leech Lake to work with the tribe, and I went south. And, wind, I am still crazy. I know there is something larger than the memory of a dispossessed people. We have seen it. So the poem begins with the capital W, wind, being referred to in the third person, then spoken about as a we. But by the end of the poem, Harjo addresses the wind directly. So here is the instance of direct address, an apostrophe that sort of intervenes in or reorients the poem, so that it's not just about a we and a third person account being delivered to a third party. But here there is apostrophe, I think means a kind of turning away. We have that sort of pivot here in the very end of the poem, where wind is directly addressed. And again, a situation is made possible here that wouldn't have been made possible in, say, a regular sort of situation of address or communication or expression. This is section 130 of Tennyson's In Memoriam. In Memoriam is a very long poem, and 130 is very near the end, very, very near the end of the long poem. It's a long elegy about the loss and death of a close friend. And so here we're catching the speaker quite deep and late in the process of mourning and grief. And so don't think of this as a poem that would have been written, say, the day after the loss or even a year after. But maybe some time has passed and the speaker is thinking about, well, what the poem says. So let's read it. Thy voice is on the rolling air. I hear thee where the waters run. Thou standest in the rising sun, and in the setting thou art fair. What art thou then? I cannot guess. But though I seem in star and flower to feel thee some diffusive power, I do not therefore love thee less. My love involves the love before. My love is vaster passion now, though mixed with God and nature, thou I seem to love thee more and more. Far off thou art, but ever nigh. I have thee still, and I rejoice. I prosper, circled with thy voice. I shall not lose thee, though I die. So a third example of apostrophe here. It's interesting to me that in some sense these are arbitrarily chosen examples. I don't even have an example of a poem that's addressed to an object, though if you've read Ode on a Grecian Urn, John Keats's famous poem, that of course would be a classic and maybe overly anthologized example of apostrophe. But what's interesting here is that each of these examples, though arbitrary, end with or dramatize somewhat ironically through direct address a kind of distance or separation. So here it's the separation of a friend who's not only dead, but has been dead a long time, or has been dead for long enough that the speaker now has lived a life that can be divided into before and now. And in Harjo's poem, you have this similar thing. You went home to Leech Lake to work with the tribe, and I went south. So the poem ends with a kind of separation between the speaker and the wind. And then to the Harbormaster ends with by basically expressing that the Harbormaster, the sort of point of arrival for the speaker, is potentially still in the distance, that the speaker either hasn't reached or will never reach the harbor. So, what might we say then about apostrophe? I would stop short of saying apostrophe always works this way, but I do think if one starts to not just identify apostrophe, but think about how to analyze it or have ideas about specific uses of apostrophe, the notes that one would take will probably have to reckon with how the poem sort of, and by irony, I don't mean sarcasm. I mean irony in the sense that something is happening, a direct address that is also incredibly indirect again, because the person or entity addressed is not there and may never be there again. And so, what does this afford? What kind of expression, what kind of mode of rhetorical questioning, what mode of meditation is opened up by the sort of apostrophic power of the lyric voice? It seems to me that would be a place to start when trying to think about O'Hara, Harjo, and Tennyson, and how they all are in a tradition of using this technique, using this figure, using this trope, continuing a history of lyric or a history of address through language that keeps the magic going. Right. That's enough on apostrophe, more than I had intended to record. Uh, Thanks for spending some time with me, and we'll read more poems tomorrow.